I think I've seen different quotes saying something like, we're going forward a matter of years and a matter of weeks or months because of COVID. What have you seen that maybe some other folks might have read about in passing in terms of what's happening economy-wide in the labor market?
Well, I think there are a couple things happening, and there are a couple reasons behind that acceleration. One is I think the pandemic accelerated the demand for robots, software products. Factories needed to keep producing goods, even if their employees were, didn't want to be in the factory. FedEx, Tyson, the meat processor, lots of companies sort of brought in robots to sort of meet demand, even while their employees, some of them were out sick. And then you had the second reason, which was that the actual technology was just moving forward. I mean, we've had, this is a super fast moving area of tech. In the past 18 months, we've had new advances in robotics, in the sort of robot arms that can pick things in warehouses. That's taken a big step forward. These large language models like GPT-3, which are coming out of AI labs and threaten to replace, frankly, me.
So GPT-3, it's like a natural language AI that can produce simple journalistic accounts. People might have seen it online.
Yeah, not even simple journalistic accounts. The Guardian wrote an op-ed a few months ago using GPT-3, and there was an editor's note at the end of the article that said this article was actually easier to edit than a lot of op-eds that we get from humans. So it's getting fairly sophisticated. And then I think the third thing that the pandemic did was that it gave corporate executives cover to do the kinds of automation that they had wanted to do for years, but had waited on because they didn't want to be seen as job killers. So I talked to a number of executives and consultants who said, we could have automated our call center 5 years ago, but we didn't want to do that because, it wouldn't save us that much money. And it was, sort of marginal, but also, our workers might get scared that their jobs were going away. But during COVID, kind of all bets were off. And so a lot of companies called up their consultants and said, hey, let's do that automation project we talked about.
Well, part of it, too, is there were consumer preferences where, like in the old days, if you had like the self-driving pizza delivery vehicle or the self-checkout or the cleaning robots, and you're a customer, you're like, oh, it's a little bit spooky or eerie. But now you're like, ooh, fewer human hands touched my thing, that's a win. So I think it gave them cover in multiple ways.
Totally. Yeah. So McKinsey called this the Great Acceleration, and they said it's basically they revised their estimate of how many workers would be displaced by AI and automation by the end of the decade. And before the pandemic, it was 37 million, and now they've changed that to 45 million.
Another 8 million jobs. Thank you, McKinsey, for cataloging our disastrous times. Where would we be without McKinsey telling us how bad it's going to get? An extra 8 million jobs lost by decade's end is enormous. I was struck by what you called robotic process automation, or RPA. It's this very boring acronym. But it turns out it touches a lot of things, and that companies are like, ooh, like I can invest in these RPA bots very often, and they just end up simplifying processes and saving money.
Yeah, the chapter in the book is called "Beware of Boring Bots." Because I think when we think of automation and the risky kinds of AI, we think about, Skynet or, RoboCop.
Dude, I had the same freaking problem all the time on the trail. I had to constantly be like, look, it's not like a robot's going to show up to your office and replace you. Right. It doesn't work quite like that.
Right. So, and the RPA thing is fascinating because RPA, robotic process automation, is like the most boring part of the AI industry. Like it is the least sexy. They don't win prizes. It's basically software programs that can be installed inside large corporations to do the work that Phil in accounting used to do. It can process invoices and approve expense reports and plug into databases and
think Dunder Mifflin. Think all the people hanging out in that office.
Exactly. So now if they made the office in 2021, it would just be like 4 RPA bots talking to each other. But I was fascinated by this because I didn't basically know it existed. And I started going to all these conferences and talking to all these executives in the RPA market. And they are really blunt about the fact that this technology is replacing people.
I mean, there was one thing that was called like the boomer remover, which is so dark. I mean, I shouldn't laugh because it was literally, it's like, hey, we can replace an elderly worker.
Yeah, this was a guy I met at a cocktail party in San Francisco, and he came up to me and introduced himself when he said, I've got this AI software called the Boomer Remover, and it basically lets companies replace sort of middle managers. And he was very proud of that. And I was thinking to myself, like, this is going to be a total disaster. I had sort of the same feeling that I'm guessing you had early in your sort of conversion on this stuff, where it's like, oh man, if there's one of these people selling Boomer Remover software, there's got to be thousands of them. And this is happening all over the economy. And what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the moments for me was talking to a very high-end venture capitalist based in Boston who was like, yeah, about 2/3 of the stuff I'm seeing is going to get rid of significant numbers of jobs. And I was like, well, you're literally someone who's just staring at the system. And it made sense to me too intuitively that the low-hanging fruit for a lot of tech companies is going to be saving labor costs, because you have to try and show where your financial returns are going to come from, and imagining that all of the financial returns are going to come from these blue sky. I mean, it made much more sense to me that you could replace Phil, and then there are a million Phils, and that's enough to grow some very, very significant companies. So we all had our moments, Kevin, and I just want to dig into something you just said, which is interesting. So you're a New York Times tech reporter, and you go to conferences. Like, how does that work? Are you like, hey, I want to go to this conference? And then when you get there, are you media? Like do people react to you like they're just pitching you their stuff because they want publicity for their company?
It works a lot of ways. I mean, this was pre-COVID, obviously, when there actually were conferences. Now I just show up on Zoom. But pre-COVID, I would go because I was covering it, or there was a talk I wanted to hear, or I was on a panel or speaking. But conferences are where a lot of this stuff happens. Or at least where it's announced. And so, there's a scene in the book where I went to Davos, which is like, I don't know if have you ever been to Davos?
I have not been to Davos, Kevin. Oh, man. Tell us more.
Well,
Davos seemed like a trip.
So Davos is like I call it the Coachella of capitalism. It's like this, week-long retreat in the Swiss Alps where all these CEOs and billionaires and heads of state get together. And, celebrities go and they fly their private jets in. And it's like the biggest, most gaudy, conference that basically ever has existed. And I've only been the one time. This was in 2019. But the thing that I was struck by was how different the conversations that I heard were on the record and off the record. So like during the day, how Davos works is... You
mean the masters of the universe don't sound exactly the same when a microphone is on and when they're at the bar, Kevin?
No, it was like a total 180. And maybe I'm naive because I was just shocked. But like during the day, they would have all these panels and they would talk about, we're doing human-centered automation to, free up workers and bring in, prosperity. And this is going to be great for everyone. And then at night, I would like go to these dinners and I would sit next to, the CEO of some Fortune 500 company. And he'd be like grilling the guy next to him who, worked at some tech company about like, how can I get rid of my back office? So it was really stark and really frightening how eager the corporate executives were to just get rid of as many people as possible. And like this, but the classic comeback, the classic thing that people say is, well, technology has always gotten rid of jobs, but it always creates more jobs. And so I started looking at that and found that really, the evidence for that just really isn't there this time.
So lazy, man. It infuriated me. Again, people who are supposed to be pretty analytical would just bust shit out on me. And I'd be like, look, if someone walked into your office and busted out a 120-year-old fact pattern on you, you'd like throw them out. You'd be like, well, I've got some I've got like a buggy whip case study. You'd be like, oh, I should invest for sure. Like the whole thing just struck me as so self-serving and ridiculous and lazy. You could imagine, like I did get that an awful lot. That's quite dark, but not surprising to me again that the conversations in private were so different from the panels. Give us some more Davos dirt, Kevin. It'll be fun.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's hilarious. So I was there as a journalist, and the way that Davos works is there's like a hierarchy of badge colors. So like if you are like a inner circle, like super elite, you get like one, I forget which color it is. It's like a pink badge or something like that, a gold badge or something. And then there's sort of 6 or 7 tiers below that. And I was like, press is like the lowest tier. And so there are a lot of things that, you just can't get into as a journalist. But there are some things that you can get into. And so I managed to weasel my way into some pretty funny events. But it's basically, it's this whole sort of do-gooder ethos, and everyone there is interested in humanitarian pursuits and philanthropy, and like it's sort of that's the Davos that you see, and then the one that you don't see is like everyone just getting like drunk at night and gossiping and hanging out with celebrities, and it's sort of a big party.